Madam Minister, Excellencies, dear panelists, dear collaborators of the Stockholm Peace Research Institute, dear members and guests of the German Council on Foreign Relations, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure to welcome you all in Berlin or at home in front of your screens for what promises again to be a very exciting event, which the German Council on Foreign Relations has organized in close cooperation with the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute. We're very happy that you were able to join us this afternoon. To say that we live in a world on fire is stating the obvious. For someone like me who has lived consciously through the dark days of the Cold War, it is probably fair to say that never before since World War II, we have faced such a high number of serious threats at the same time. Scientific evidence confirms that the world has entered a new era of risk in which the acute climate crisis is reinforced by challenging security concerns. Russia's war on Ukraine, with its repercussions on energy, food, migration, and inflation, has created trade-off dilemmas for deciders. The growing nuclear threat, nuclear proliferation, and the consequences of strategic competition with a rising new superpower risks to detract attention from the climate crisis and its potential risks to billions of people. Insecurity writ large is on the increase worldwide and jeopardizes peace in all corners of the earth. At the same time, climate crisis is a catalyst for conflict and tensions. Climate change, loss of biodiversity, pollution, and resource scarcity are already impacting every part of the globe. Climate-related displacements due to natural disasters and famines are increasingly resulting in complex humanitarian crises. To address these ever more pressing issues, the world convened in Sharm el-Sheikh for the 27th Conference of the Parties to the Paris Climate Agreement. Judging from Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock's comments after the conference, the results were ambiguous. Some of them were rather frustrating. A fund of damage and loss has been created. However, a decision about the money committed and who is going to be part of it on the receiving and the giving side is lacking. Still worse, there was no progress on the phasing out of gas and oil, as well as on no decision on the level of ambition. There's growing evidence that the international community will reach the critical level of CO2 emissions much earlier than envisaged if we don't act faster. In today's joint event, experts from the German Council on Foreign Relations and the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute will assess in detail the outcome of COP27 and its impact on peace and security. To discuss these and other issues, it is my pleasure to welcome you, Madam Minister, Margot Wallström, former Foreign Minister of Sweden, former Vice President of the European Commission, and Chair of the International Board of the Environment of Peace Initiative. We're very honored to have you here today. We're very much looking forward to your presentation on climate security and feminist foreign policy after COP27. Warm welcome to you, Madam Minister. We're also very happy to have with us Dan Smith, Director of the Stockholm Peace Research Institute. Dan has written widely on security, conflict, and peace. He served 4 years in the UN Peacebuilding Commission, Peacebuilding Fund Advisory Group, 2 as chair from 2010 to 2011. Welcome, sir, for being with us. We're looking forward to your perspective on the issues of the table. We're also very happy to have with us Andrew Harper, Special Advisor for the climate action at UNHCR. Warm welcome to you, sir, as well. It is also a great pleasure to welcome our Kira Vinke, the head of our DGAP Center for Climate and Foreign Policy. Kira also serves as co-chair of the advisory board of the German federal government Commission on Civilian Crisis Prevention and Peace Building. She's just returned, like others, from Sharm el-Sheikh and can probably give us an inside view about the negotiations at COP27. Welcome, Kira. Great to have you with us. Today's panel will be moderated by Dana Schirwon, who is a research fellow at the DGAP Center for Climate and Foreign Policy. Dana recently finished her PhD summa cum laude. Congratulations on that. It deserves a round of applause. Thank you for moderating today's event. Just a word on today's sequence. Minister Wallström will first provide an overview on the interconnections, climate security, and feminist foreign policy. After this presentation, our panelists will discuss how policymakers can navigate these intersecting crises and what that means for the international security landscape, and what will be needed to simultaneously promote peace, save the climate, and protect the environment. After that, a Q&A session. You will all have the opportunity, both in personal attendance and online, to ask questions. I want to thank Dan Smith and the collaborators of the Stockholm Peace Research Institute, International Peace Research Institute, for the outstanding cooperation with our Climate and Security Center. Furthermore, I would very much like to thank our events team headed by Julia Loeber, there she is, for the flawless organization. Without all of you, this wouldn't have been possible. I wish you all a most interesting and fruitful debate. Now, without further ado, Madam Minister, the floor is yours.
So, dear friends, thank you very much for having me and us, I would say, if I speak for my friends also from the project Environment of Peace. And it's particularly nice for somebody who is a former everything by now. I think this might be the right opportunity to reveal a secret. First of all, I will tell you that I have actually met President Putin eye to eye. I have even negotiated with him, but this goes 20 years back. And we were at that time discussing the Kyoto Protocol. And you remember that was something that came before the Paris Agreement and other agreements. And it was a very, very difficult negotiation. And I was heading the EU delegation, of course, to Marrakesh. And it was so difficult, and the Russians were so difficult, that actually my chief negotiator in the team fell in tears in the end and said, you know, we have worked so hard for such a long time and they won't give in. And we decided that we would travel to Moscow and try once again to get an agreement on the last outstanding bits of this. So I led a small delegation, and we were told that President Putin would meet us in his dacha. And you think of a dacha as, you know, like a wooden house looking nice. No, it was like a cement bunker and with enormous security arrangements around it. But at that time, and again, 20 years ago, President Putin was a polite, correct negotiator heading his team, never allowing anybody else to say a word. We didn't hear anybody else speak. He had a complete, he mastered the brief fully, knew every detail of the negotiations. But when we were standing there, before we started, you know, there is a moment when you try to do some small talk. And actually, I saw on the wall, there were some pictures and photos of him in his judo. You know, he has like a black belt in judo. Is it called judo in English? Yeah, judo. So I saw those pictures, and I tried to say that, well, my oldest son has also started it. And then he called for a helper, and this guy came up to him, he whispered something in his ear, and he disappeared, and he came back just a few minutes later with a full judo dress, or whatever it's called, with a jacket and trousers and the belt, and his monogram, his full name, you know, monogram here. So he handed that over to me, and it exists in my basement still after all these years. I didn't have the heart to give that to my son. I never intended to. And also since then, I've never told anybody that I have that in my basement. I don't know what to do with it. But I think also that afterwards, I said to my team, I have never met a person with such ice cold eyes. And because you could never see any emotion sort of reaching to. So maybe that was a forewarning of what would come later on. But that's my secret. I don't know what to do with the judo dress, if I could auction it out, but that could also go wrong. So you will have to stay here. Again, thank you very much for having us, and thank you for inviting us to present also our important report. And one could say, well, is this really the right time to come out with a report called Environment of Peace with everything that is going on in the world? And we say, on the contrary, this is exactly the right time to come out with a report called Environment of Peace. And I just wanted to say a few words about that to begin with, because what we are saying is that in a nutshell, this report mentions two crises and the deficit. And that's our starting point. And of course, we have actually manifold environmental crises. And I don't have to tell you here some of the examples of what that consists of, but the demand for water has increased almost eightfold since the year 1900. 94% of the world's fish stocks are being exploited beyond sustainability. About 25% of all species are at risk of extinction, and there will be another COP to discuss also biodiversity, as you know, very soon. And these figures, the list can be made very, very long. A third of the world's soils are degraded, threatening to rise also by to 90% by 2050. And to that, the other big crisis is, of course, the darkening security horizon, with a war that is going on in our neighborhood. And we have also a breakdown of arms controls and international cooperation, and the discussion about the non-proliferation treaty didn't go well at all. And we've had a doubling of the number of armed conflicts as the number of people killed in those conflicts over the last 10 years. And also the number of forcibly displaced persons rose from 42.7 million in 2012 to 89.3 million in 2021. This is, and at the same time, global military spending now exceeded 2.1 trillion last year, having nearly doubled since the year 2000. So it is indeed a darkening security horizon. And on top of that, we have what we call a global governance deficit. World leaders are failing to address this new era of very complex and often unpredictable risks and challenges as these crises converge and intensify. And we know that these armed conflicts, of course, require urgent responses, but continued damage to the planet's ecosystems poses the biggest long-term risk to global human and collective security of our time. subsidies for fossil fuels are provided also by governments over to a value of over $500 billion per year, 10 times the 10 times of the cost of damage caused by burning them. So, and I could repeat this, and this is some of the results that came out also during the meeting in Sharm el-Sheikh. Now, many of you have been to Sharm el-Sheikh, and I was not there. So you know much more about the atmosphere, you know more about the results, you know more about sort of the practical outcome. I can only refer to what we could see from the outside and following this. And I think we are left with the feeling that this was, in one way, it was a success. If you see that the loss and damages was addressed, that of course the developing world felt that finally you sort of are willing to take some kind of responsibility or compensate for what you have done over the years, but of course not enough, and not maybe designed in such a way that we can be completely satisfied, but also with the risk of this overshadowing the fact that the ambition of actually getting rid of fossil fuels and setting ambitious targets for that was not achieved at all. And maybe that this will take over. Now there will be a debate about how to design a system for compensating losses and damages, but what will happen with all the rest? And I think also, as you said before we went into this room, that where are the young people and those mostly affected by climate change, and not least women? Because we know that women are also the ones who have to go and look for food or try to get an everyday life to work and also find solutions to how a family can survive. But they are also very few of the leaders who appear later on in the family photos. Very few of them, I understand, were women, as usual. And this is why I mean, I could talk forever about feminist foreign policy, but it is now excluded from the new government, the Swedish government's agenda. So maybe I should be a bit careful also what I say. I think that the content and the targets and the goals of a feminist foreign policy is really to understand and acknowledge that more women means more peace. If women are there, they are making up half of the world's population. If they are there around the table where peace negotiations are being carried out, you will have more options on the table, and peace deals will last longer because they bring their experiences, their knowledge, their perspective to these negotiations. And that's very, very important. Imagine what happens in Ukraine at the moment, where women have to flee, they have to leave the country, often with the children, or they have to stay and then take care of the elderly or take care of trying to provide some kind of daily life and subsistence and the men, while the men fight. And women are also more exposed to the risks of sexual violence in a conflict situation. And if this is never brought to the negotiation table, the risk is also that there is no accountability for this. It is no acknowledgement of the experiences that women have from war and conflict. And this ought to be a given, but is not. Still, we see so many peace deals being made without one single woman there. And this cannot continue. It was 20 years ago that we agreed that war and peace affects women and men differently. And we have to acknowledge that, and we have to put in system a way to include also women. Anyhow, this is sort of the analysis that we have made from our project, Environment of Peace. And of course, we try then to provide some principles for what to do about it. And to do that also in a language that everybody can read. So I recommend the report. I am sure that you will be able to read it and understand it fully. And we have 6 recommendations for action. We say we have to address the linked crisis with joint solutions. So of course, cooperation. We have to invest in preparedness and resilience. We have to finance peace, not risk. We have to deliver a just and peaceful transition. And I think that, of course, goes for climate change as well, addressing climate change. And we have to be deliberately inclusive. That means if we start to look at how to do mining again, open new mines, we have to engage and include the people who will be affected by this. And we have to plan for that. We have to research, educate, and inform. And governments and all of you who work for the government and for different organizations have to be also active on these issues. And if I translated this into sort of my language, and then this is my summary of it, what has to be done. We have to step up. And because the crisis and the darkening security situation needs urgent and committed action. We need to build up, and that means we must invest in making our societies much stronger, more prepared, and more resilient. We have to link up. We have to cooperate. Shared problems demand shared solutions. We need to look up because in this new era of risk, we need to be constantly scanning the horizon for unexpected challenges. And we have to pay up. And until now, only 1/80th of the money that goes to address climate change has gone to the poorest countries and those that are mostly affected by climate change. 1/80th. So countries have to pay up. And in the end, never give up. That's the one thing we cannot do, but we have to continue to work together. And I think we have a huge challenge in front of us. And when you know the ancient story about the old man who is trying to tell his grandchild about life and about people, and he says that inside every person there are 2 wolves. They are fighting for space, and the one wolf is the one that carried, you know, that represents violence and revenge and envy, all of those sort of negative feelings that a person can have. And the other wolf represents the opposite, with compassion and love and all the good things a person can be. And of course, the grandchild asks in the end, but which wolf wins? And the grandfather says, the one you feed. And I think we now have to feed the good wolf if we are to succeed with all those enormous challenges that we have. I think we have contributed with our report. I think that feminist foreign policy will have to give priority to also include women in working on climate change and for the just transitions, because they're also among the poorest. people on this planet. Women do not get as much money as men. They don't earn as much. And we've seen it during the pandemic, how women were also affected in a way that it carries a woman's face when the pandemic hit as well, because they have precarious jobs. They were also often fired from service, doing service jobs, etc. And I think that we will only succeed if we work together. I hope that that will also be true for Sweden and Germany, my own country and Germany in the future. And I think we also, both countries, believe in multilateralism, in supporting the different fora that we have for international cooperation. And only then will the right wolf win. So I'll finish with that. And I trust that you will also contribute with more insights, all of you, to what happened in Sharm el-Sheikh. I also hope that we will be able to continue with a feminist foreign policy with the content, even if the name has been scrapped by the Swedish government. And I'm sure we will be successful. Thank you so much for being here.
Maybe I may ask a first question before we continue. As you may be aware, the German government at the moment is drafting a lot of strategies, inter alia the strategy on climate foreign policy, but also the strategy on feminist foreign policy, the feminist guidelines. And it will be really interesting to see how both feminist foreign policy, but also climate foreign policy are mainstreamed within these strategies and within each other also. So it would be interesting to see from your perspective, what would be the key instruments and the key characteristic of a feminist climate foreign policy when you combine those two mainstreamed strategies and mainstream policy approaches.
Well, this is actually a difficult question, because I think that our experience is very often that women do small projects with starting in their own village or their families, and they come together to solve the everyday problems. They are rarely acknowledged for when they only serve also in small organizations, because money goes to big organizations or NGOs, and not always to those very crucial projects that have to do with finding clean drinking water or making sure that you can continue to grow food or vegetables or whatever. So I think that this is give support also to small women's organizations, but also you have to figure out how are women and men affected respectively by the policies that we introduce, and how do you become deliberately inclusive in making sure that we listen also to women's voices and their experiences. So at least that has been my understanding of how things have happened until now. And actually also as Environment Commissioner, I remember women coming to say, well, we only have this, we are very few, but we think we're doing a good job. Could we get just some small money to this project? No, we only do big projects here because there's so much bureaucracy. You would have to fill in 500 pages of statistics before we can give you any money. But this is true. I mean, that was really the experience. Maybe it is much better now with the Commission. But you know, we have to figure out a way to give support also to those sort of smaller projects. If I just take one example of what that could mean in real life. So, but it's about being also using that perspective in your way of thinking about climate change and adaptation. Sorry.
Thank you very much. So changing perspectives, I think, is also key when it comes to the second part of our event, and when we discuss how to navigate this new era of risk. So thank you very much for the introductory remarks. You may stay on the panel, and I would kindly ask our panelists to join me here on the panel so that we continue with the second part of this event. Thank you very much. Okay. So also a very warm welcome from my side. My name is Schirwon, and I work here as a research fellow. And I'm very happy to have the pleasure to moderate this very interesting and exciting panel discussion with the topic navigating intersecting crises in a new era of risk, together with this excellent panel here. We will divide the next hour in 2 parts. So first we will start with closed rounds of discussion among the panel. And then we would like to open up the debate to give all of you the opportunity to also to ask your questions to our excellent panelists. So I would like to start with the first introductory question that may give you the opportunity to very briefly maybe already explain one key argument, one key thesis when it comes to the topic of tonight's panel. I would like to ask you, when we see these multiple but also these intersecting crises, as you, Mrs. Wallström, already explained to us in the first part, we see probably a major challenge also for governments at the moment to deal with these crises. You all have great expertise in the field of both climate but also international security. So my question would be, if you could name one measure that should be crucial as a tool of navigation in these intersecting climate and security crises, what would it be? And maybe, Mr. Smith, if you would like to start.
You see, the problem in your question is that it's got a huge temptation in it for me. And I'm, of course, going to give in to it. Because your question is, what is a navigation tool in these crises? And, you know, to navigate, you need to find your way. You need a compass, or you need a route map, or whatever. And I think Margot and other colleagues of mine can already see which cheap way I'm going. Because more generally speaking than just saying, do please read the report, Google Environment of Peace, and you can download it. It's completely free access. And as Margot said, it's really superbly written. We didn't let a single researcher come anywhere near the writing process. It's written by somebody who really knows how to write, and we just made sure that we were happy with the evidence and the logic, but the expression is crystal clear. But the thing is that beyond that, it's that point that we said about information and understanding is super important. We have to be recognizing that we are in a new era of risk. The issues that we face today and the security horizon are by definition unprecedented, because such a large part of them is driven by an environmental crisis which is unfolding and which we have not experienced before. Right? So we cannot look back over our shoulders to find easy lessons. We cannot even look back over our shoulders for proof of what these risks are. We have to be looking ahead. And this means that we have to be all the time learning and thinking. And is the decision which we have taken And the programs that we have started to implement, are these the right ones? Do they need a little bit of adaptation, a little bit of change? Let's change them. Let's keep on going. And to do that as well, we have to be not only understanding the importance of information and of knowledge, but also of working together, of cooperating. A lot of the most important knowledge, of course, I'm a researcher, a lot of the most important knowledge comes out of all of the national statistics and the facts and so on. But a lot of important knowledge comes from the experience that people in local communities have, understanding what the problems are which they face and the best way to handle them. And that's why in the report, we put a lot of emphasis on inclusion, on including marginalized groups, and especially on including indigenous people. So how do I sum all of that up, apart from saying, read the environment of peace? I think it is that the key instrument is an inventive and inclusive and sharing approach to learning while doing.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for this this talk about the Environment of Peace report. And I want to add some lessons from our very complimentary report, because I think what makes this event so nice is that we have these two kind of monument documents that are bringing together two different perspectives. And I think the Environment of Peace report gives this bird's eye perspective on this issue of intersecting crises. And our predictive analytics report, which we have collaborated on, and you will say probably a few more words on this, looks specifically at the Sahel region and how climate change is contributing to conflict there, is contributing to displacement crises there. And one of the recognitions from working on this project, which combines both quantitative climate modeling and qualitative field research from the Sahel region, from Burkina Faso, Niger, is that we are witnessing so many compounding environmental and social crises that are forcing people to abandon their traditional livelihoods. And I think one of the key insights from this is that we need more provisions to protect these livelihoods, and at the same time also to enable safe migration pathways for those who can no longer inhabit these spaces that have been traditionally inhabited. So this would be my first instrument, but maybe you can.
Thanks, Kira. I think the reason why we went into this report, and I'll plug it as well, was that, so I work for the UN Refugee Agency, and just moving on from what Margaret said in terms of how many people have been displaced, it's now 103 million. It's ridiculous that we continue to react. And it's also ridiculous, as we were discussing prior to this meeting, was that you have negotiations at Sharm el-Sheikh and they don't include scientists. They often don't include data. It's just basically people representing their own vested interests. Those vested interests could be states, could be individuals, but it's very rarely the global good. And so I think what we, as the UN Refugee Agency, we realize that we, as a humanitarian agency, we often react because we're a refugee agency. People cross a border, we provide plastic sheeting, WFP provides food, UNICEF will put up a couple of schools. That is not how we can deal with the issue of human security. It's not the issue of how we can deal with dignity. We have to be able to anticipate, because the evidence is out there, the data is out there. And what is so great about the situation now is that there is so much potential for better collaboration. Within this report, we had, I think, 20 entities involved. And the more that we engaged with others, the more that more and more people wanted to become involved. So there is that potential to do something good, but we have to take advantage of it. And the other issue too is that on the positive side is that I was in Mozambique prior to going to COP, and this is I'll push now the point that we need to be addressing, which also fits in with Margaret's point, is that without education, we're also not going to go anywhere. Without education, quality education, particularly for girls, you're not going to see any gender empowerment. And one of the issues that we need to take into account is that the world is changing at a pace which we've never seen before, we can't even grasp. And what I saw in Mozambique was that no one, I wouldn't say no one, but there was a lack of understanding about the environment, how important it was to protect the environment. There was a lack of understanding about people's rights. There was a lack of understanding in terms of how you can do agroforestry, best practices, learning from others. And so it's about education, it's about communication, it's about what Dan was saying, making sure that communities are involved in trying to determine what their priorities are so that those priorities can be addressed and supported. But at the moment, I still see a very top-down approach, whether it be in the negotiations in COP, whether it be people making decisions on behalf of others. It's not the people who are really on the front lines. And so we also discussed previously before, at COP, we need to have the people whose future is being decided.
I can add just a few short points. I really think that inclusion is the key here. And if I remember correctly from Niger, the level of child marriages is very high. And of course, if you are married away at 15, on average, you then give birth to 7 children. And you will never get back to school. You will never come back to, and how can you fight poverty in a country with such a high level of child marriage? So it comes together with also understanding and making the right analysis of what is necessary to do for children and women and girls. So education is key to all of this. To get them to school also prevents these sort of child marriages, and you can be much more effective in fighting poverty. But we risk in looking at and describing the crisis and deficits and what have all of these problems sound like scaremongers and talking about a catastrophe awaiting. I think we should also offer, particularly many of these local environmental projects as examples of where you build peace also, where you build a good foundation for cooperation and a more peaceful development. And it often starts with water, that because everybody needs water. And if you can find projects that will it can build those bridges as well. So the local projects engage and involve local populations and in particular also women, and you have a better chance of succeeding.
Thank you very much. I think when we look at those 2 reports, the main intersection or the main similarity actually is looking at vulnerabilities and also looking at deficits, not only governance deficits, but also deficits of organizations and so on. Mr. Smith, in the Environment of Peace report, I think you also very much look into the differences when it comes to vulnerabilities. And this is also the main focus when it comes to feminist foreign policy, that we need to look at vulnerabilities. Where are societies and where are members of society most vulnerable, and how do we find answers and solutions to those? So what were your key findings in the Environment of Peace support? What could be possible solutions, especially to those most vulnerable? And what should governments, such as the German government, who just is implementing its feminist foreign policy, what should they actually, what kind of measures should they take in that respect?
One of the key things to understand or to hold in our minds is a balance between a sort of, you know, everybody is affected by this. This is a global issue. Right? That's one of the things which is wrong, in my view, about the whole approach that we see in COP27, where we see delegations negotiating as if they were adversaries, as if the problem here is not the problem there. I mean, this is one world, it is one ecosphere, it is one body of water, actually, it is one atmosphere. At the same time as understanding the universality of everything, you need to understand the specificity of everything. The problem is actually very, very different for different people in different societies with different degrees of wealth, with different degrees of access to voice, with different degrees of access to participation in somehow setting the terms of the power, the regulation of their lives, and so on. So I think that, I mean, then you understand as well that vulnerability is not just to do with, for example, if you're thinking about vulnerability to climate change, it's not just to do with, let's take the example of sea level rise. It's not simply to do with being located on a sea, within 5 meters of sea level, for example, where sea level surges of the kind that the IPCC has shown the science predicts that we will be having sea level events once a year by 2050. That used to be once every half century or even less frequently. But vulnerability is not just about where you are geographically, where you're physically located. Vulnerability is also about, is the city that you're living in able to look after you? If you suffer, or might suffer, is your voice heard? If you are a woman, is your plight taken as seriously as if you are a man? If you are a poor man, is your plight taken as seriously as if you were a rich woman? There is gender, there is class, there is ethnicity, there is age. All of these things come into it. So vulnerability is a social and political fact as much as it is, if you like, a natural fact, a fact of geographic location. And this is before I've even mentioned the vulnerability to violent conflict. Right? So addressing vulnerability is not simply a technical question. It is a social question. And I think that this is the thing that we kind of identify throughout the report repeatedly as we looked at problems and as we looked at the best ways to resolve them. We find ourselves saying, this is not just technical, or it's not just about more money. In the end, it's not just about what you do, it's about how you do it. And so I think the one big conclusion to try to draw out of that for informing, for example, a feminist foreign policy and an approach to this is not just that it needs to be inclusive, right? It needs to be respectful of different peoples and the way that they live and where they are and what their needs are. And it needs to be thoughtful about the texture of what you're doing, about the detail of what you're doing. This is not something to write up in a simple project sheet and you're delivering this amount of aid to that place and get the job done and move on to somewhere else. Right? This is about something which is much more to do with trying to empower people to assist them to assist them themselves. And that I think is some part of the keynote of a feminist foreign policy approach to these issues.
Thank you very much. I think this is very interesting, also focusing or mainly focusing actually on a change of perspectives to concentrate on vulnerability rather than on state security and state interests, for example. Kira, if I may direct the next question towards you. In the report on anticipating vulnerability in the Sahel region, a huge part which was actually about migration and displacement. However, one of the key findings were also that those being most vulnerable, they are actually often trapped. So climate immobility is also a huge problem when it comes to marginalized groups in the Sahel region. So could you maybe identify some solutions in your report, and what were those groups in particular in the Sahel, and what are the reasons for those groups of being trapped in climate hotspots?
Yes, it's hard to generalize because it's such a vast and very diverse region. But with regard to immobility, I would say there's two groups: one who are voluntary immobile, who don't want to leave no matter what happens, and those who are involuntary immobile, who would like to go elsewhere, but don't have the financial resources, don't have the networks, or don't have the physical abilities to move from one place to another. And often what I have witnessed in my research is that there is a family, and within this family, often the man migrates first and leaves the family, at least temporarily, to make an income elsewhere. Sometimes he returns as a part of seasonal migration. Sometimes he stays away and just sends money. And this leaves often a very heavy burden on the women, who then have to take care of the children, have to take care of the land, have kind of a double burden where they come from. And there's, in some of the research I did in Burkina Faso, there was also worry for those seasonal migrants who would return, that they would bring back communicable diseases such as HIV, but also other diseases back to the village from the places they had worked. So what can be done? I think in some areas we will see rising climate risks. We know from the IPCC reports that we will reach the 1.5 degree limit. And if we don't rapidly reduce emissions, we will also overshoot this limit. And this means we will see much more severe climate impacts in this region, translating into migration pressure. And if we don't release this pressure somehow by offering pathways to people to migrate, we will see humanitarian catastrophe, and also people simply dying from heat stress, dying from more communicable diseases, which are also kind of fortified by the climate crisis. I think one of the approaches to help support livelihoods under kind of moderate warming levels is farmer-managed natural regeneration. It's a kind of reforestation techniques where communities are brought together, and we write about this in the report on the Sahel as well, where communities are brought together to leave the land actually alone for a little while, so that some small bushes can grow again from the underground forest that still exists, even if the land looks barren, because there's a lot of root system, seeds still in the ground. And if you don't let goats and sheep graze over it constantly, if you don't constantly chop what is growing there for firewood, you can have these bushes re-emerge, and if you kind of trim these bushes, you have trees growing again. And this has been a very successful method. For example, in Niger, it has brought back water. The water cycle was stabilized through it. It has given shade so that the land is not so much exposed to heat anymore. It kind of buffers a little bit this effect on of the rising temperatures. So this is one pathway that I find very promising.
Thank you very much. That is very, very interesting. And I think we also saw some of these examples in our recent trip to the Congo. where there have been also very interesting projects on reforestation and agroforestation, for example. In the same direction, actually goes my next question to you, Mr. Harper. You, as a special advisor on climate action with the UNHCR, you are the very example on how the intersection of climate but also human security works in practice. So I would be interested also from your experiences now from the report on how strategically climate change and climate risks are integrated in the work of the UNHCR, and what room for improvement you maybe also see in your work. Thank you.
Thanks, Donna. I'd probably say it's not very well so far, because I don't think there's very few good examples anywhere about how going from community consultation to prioritization to ensuring that the funds get to the populations, to ensure that the projects that need to be put in place are more than just a photo opportunity, which is across the board is what I see whenever I go out to the field, and that there's still a complete lack of collaboration in order to address the issues at play in the needed holistic manner. So, but that's what we're trying to do. That's why the High Commissioner created the position, so that we try and get ahead of the curve. Because if you're not ahead of the curve, then you're always reacting, and that's what the world's doing. We're always reacting. We're hoping that the things are not going to get as bad as what they are, but they continually are worse. So going back again to looking at data, looking at science, talking to communities on the ground, it's so important that you then start breaking it down. So it's not just UNHCR, it's what we're trying to do, and this is probably one of the key elements. And I see on the back of this, it says, working together for a prosperous and peaceful Sahel. You're not going to have a peaceful Sahel if one agency works by itself. You're not going to have a peaceful Sahel if it's just run by a government or by the UN or by the private sector or by having a security focus. It needs to involve everyone who's interested in a resilient, peaceful Sahel or anywhere else in that matter. So what I dare say some of the key elements of our strategy is collaboration, 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 community-driven, community-driven, community-driven. Looking at science as much as possible to inform, and evidence to inform our decision-making. And so I think it was a good example in terms of COP. So I was in Mozambique. I'd been into the north. I'd sort of met the communities. I was able to then move to Southern Africa, South Africa, talk to the African Development Bank, talk to the African Risk Capacity, talk about what we're doing in the Sahel. So you come up with you have the ground voice. So you've got your dust on your shoes, but you've also been able to bring the perspective of the local communities. You're then talking to development agencies, because a lot of the issues are development. It's education, it's agroforestry, it's environmental issues, it's water, it's health issues, it's governance issues. These issues are generally beyond what UNHCR would normally do, but we can at least try and drive those issues. That you're not going to have any progress in Mozambique if no one trusts the government in Mozambique. If we're worried about where the money is going to go, if the money goes into Maputo and doesn't get down into Nampula, then it doesn't matter how many great climate adaptation funds or climate funds you have, no one's going to put the money in there. So the other thing which we've been looking to do is to try and raise the ambition. And again, this is why just looking at where we are today is not sufficient. We need to look at what are going to be the crises of the future. You do have an urbanization process, which is creating these mega cities. These mega cities are not prepared for what's about to befall them. They're also not going to be immune from the impact of climate change, and whether they're going to be able to deal with everything from solid waste to ensuring that they've got proper educational health facilities. These are issues which got to be taken into account. But probably also what's super important is the need to have an accountability. There was one of our refugee, I don't want to say our refugees, one of our sort of key ambassadors. She's Sudanese, now living in the States, and young, and she was very passionate in COP. She said, we need to know who we're accountable for and who we're accountable to. And I just don't think many of us actually see that there is an accountability. We just do our day-to-day jobs without necessarily sort of seeing what is the difference that we need to be making every day, every week, every year. And one of the frustrating things that I had in COP, and I mentioned it prior to this meeting, was that I somehow got mixed up with my tweets, which I do, and looked at tweets from a year ago. And I was thinking, everyone's talking about COP26, so that's wrong. But they were COP26. Nothing has changed. The same notes that the Secretary General had said, the same what Alex Sharma was saying, the wording was exactly the same. I had not seen a significant change in the implementation or the resilience or the ambition. So I think what we need to be doing is to try and start holding ourselves not only each accountable for us who are here, but to the populations. And this then goes back to the education side. People need to be informed of who are working with them, for them, and maybe who's exploiting them. I don't want to sort of necessarily create a challenge here, but I think we need to. We need to empower those people who don't normally have a voice in the discussions that are going on. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I think that very nicely hints towards my next question, which will be for you, Mrs. Wallström. We talked a lot about the recent COP, but also those two reports focusing on vulnerability, but also environmental peace building. But when we look towards the future, towards the next COP, which will take place in Dubai, what would be your visions and your hopes maybe for next year's COP from a feminist perspective, particularly?
Well, it starts with women participating, of course, being there, being mentioned, being sort of involved and included. I do not have very high hopes for the next COP. I really think that what has happened in the last few conference of the parties show us that we might need a new format for these discussions. And if it is maybe to have sort of a separate, smaller group that can prepare, that can come up with some ideas, that so that it doesn't happen the night before the conference is going to conclude, but really well prepared and anchored with also some of the most important actors and with the governments. Maybe that's the way. But also, you cannot have these COPs without inviting young people and indigenous people and all of that, and really making room for them and listening to them in a much more serious way. I think this time it was very difficult for civil society to make themselves heard, and so few of them could be there as well. And that was the whole idea also, that it would be inclusive. So I think we have to figure out a new and better format that also leaves us with the chance of being successful. But without a political will, we get nowhere. If governments do not want to commit, if governments do not want to provide funding or pay up, so that's the other thing. There are all these pledging conferences, all these promises also of financing, and then they never pay. I'm saying that's a great thing. Governments do not pay, and that's also a problem. So I think you should not be allowed to pledge something without showing the money as well. What do you think, Per? You have been in those negotiations and in those contexts, couldn't we find a system? Because we've been in, for example, pledging conferences for Syria, for Yemen, and in the end, they promise a lot, but they never pay. So maybe we could find a system where you actually binding pledges. I think that would be much better. So a few of those changes would at least maybe provide a better result. Can I just give you a short anecdote from, because this is one of the things that have impressed me the most and really changed my life in a way, and that was a visit to Chad and Niger. And I traveled as foreign minister, but with people also from the UN. And we visited Lake Chad. And as you know, Lake Chad has shrunk with 90% or since the 1960s. And of course, climate change exacerbates this process of drying Lake Chad up. And we met with this young woman, and a beautiful young girl in a long dress. And she was sitting all the time. So we were just sort of, it looked strange. She had a very long dress, and it looked strange. Something was wrong. We understood that she had no legs. And she told us her story, which was that since the shrinking of Lake Chad, there are only like small islands that have now been occupied by some of the terrorist groups and armed groups, because it's a very good location for them. They can keep watch out, and they have their own sort of small hideouts there. And also they bring women there. And she and her friend was also taken to one of these small islands and kept there. And then they were trained as suicide bombers. So they were sent to the local market with bombs attached to their waist. And also they had strict instructions on how to release those bombs. And the other girl got nervous, and the bomb went off too early, and she was killed in that explosion. And then this girl managed to get out. She did not want to stay in the market, and understood that she would be killing so many people. So she tried to get rid of the bomb, but it still exploded, and it took her legs off. But to her, it was a chance of a new life. And she was now studying to become a lawyer, and had been helped in every way. But after that, we also went to meet with some of the women who lived by Lake Chad. And they said that before, when the lake was big, the boats were big, the fish were big, and the men were doing the fishing. Now it's for us women. We have almost no boats or small boats. We have very bad nets, and the fish are so small. But we try to do the most out of this fish. And I remember us being very upset also. So why aren't they not given any equipment to actually do this, to do the fishing still? Because they turn this into food of some kind. I don't know exactly what they made out of it, but they have made a business and made food out of it. And so it has changed everything for them. And it's a combination of, the environmental change with Lake Chad shrinking, but also climate change exacerbating, making it worse, and then even open up for sort of these armed groups that make this their sort of safe haven on those small islands, and including training, taking women, young women, and also training them as suicide. So it was like the strangest of development, but who would have guessed that this is what would come out of it? And how do you avoid all of this? And how do you provide a way to get a living to all these people and survive near Lake Chad when everything has changed so drastically. And I guess this is your story, some of your stories as well. So I think that gives the impression of how serious it is, and also how things, it becomes a wicked, what is it you call it then? A wicked problem. And I think it can become, I think it sounds overwhelming. What can we do? So what can governments do? Where do you start? And how do you make sure that at least we start with the low-hanging fruits that have to do with training and information and education? Because we're good at that. No, we can afford, we have trained and educated people, so we can start by learning more about these contexts and these wicked problems and how they come together. And then maybe find, as we are trying to do, to find pilot countries that can also embrace our view of these things, and start with something that can be followed up and see how do we measure success? How can we get proper results? Sorry for a long answer to you.
No, thank you very much. I think this was a very interesting and remarkable anecdote, but also a vision and maybe some hope for next year's COP and for future formats on also what to concentrate on when we crises. I still have a lot of questions, but I guess our audience is probably also waiting for its chance to ask their questions to our panelists. So I would like to open up our debate and give the room to you. And I already see the first question. Please. Oh yeah, and if you could briefly introduce yourself and with regarding the time, maybe just short questions, and rather abstain from general comments so that we have enough time.
Nikolai von Schöpf, thank you very much for this interesting discussion. I have two concrete questions for Mrs. Wallström regarding the format of events like the COP27. Is it still useful to have individual EU countries to give their national statements, but better having, so to say, a joint agreed position and statement of the EU instead? Second, regarding feminist foreign policy, the guiding principle of international policy is not interfering in internal affairs. How do you manage regarding authoritarian states to promote feminist foreign policy in case they don't want this? Thank you.
I think that countries ought to do both, sort of sign up to the EU, the common policies and common commitments by the EU, but also they have to act on their own. But I mean, we have been successful in fulfilling our commitments under the Kyoto Protocol and onwards, and we have delivered on the commitments that we made together in the European Union. And of course, if we can do the Green Deal and also deliver on that, that will definitely bring amazing results. So very important, but we also play a role individually, and big countries like Germany and France are, of course, very, very crucial to get some good results and tangible results. But we have to be loyal to the fact that we do this together also and deliver together in the European Union. Well, I mean, I don't see that any of the authoritarian countries will declare or pursue a feminist foreign policy in the near future, but we have to show why this is important. And I think Iran will now learn the hard way what happens when women are not given rights and that they can live as free people in their own countries. So we will see where this goes. And it is not a movement any longer, it is a revolution. And the future face of Iran will be of a woman, I'll tell you.
Thank you. Okay, a lot of questions. Maybe we take 3 in a row regarding the time. First here in the front. Yeah, in the orange jacket.
Yeah, thank you very much for the interesting discussion. My name is Sophie von Löben. I work for the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research. I'm a researcher. And you mentioned the Loss and Damage Fund that was mentioned by or was an outcome of the COP, but it's yet to be decided how it will be set up. So I would be interested in your views on how you think it could be set up, taking into consideration the different vulnerabilities and also without making it too bureaucratic.
Thank you. There was another question. There.
Hi, thank you very much. My name is Michelle. I'm a fellow at the Center for Feminist Foreign Policy at the moment. I had 2 questions. So one is in regard to the gender negotiations. When we talk about a feminist foreign policy, it's important to also highlight the gender negotiations, and they went pretty bad. I was in Sharm el-Sheikh. I followed them all 2 weeks. It actually was concluded that they would go to Bonn, but then in last minutes, the Egyptian presidency was pressing for an actual result. And what we could actually tell is that there has been so little preparations for gender negotiations. The topic was not on the agenda, and it wasn't even for the German government. I mean, there was not even a gender focal point present at Sharm el-Sheikh. And I just wanted to know, how can we deal with something like that? How can we put a topic on the agenda? And the other one would be regarding militarism. You talk about peace, but what about the military spending? There has been this TNI report recently, which said that the most wealthy states put 30 times more money into militaries than in climate finance. Should we not address that we actually need demilitarization in order to achieve climate justice? Thank you.
Thank you. And then there was a third question in the back.
Hello, thank you very much. My name is Maximilian Ziegler, and we spoke a lot about cooperation tonight. And my question would be rather, there is a lot of competition as well in the sphere of climate change. And how would one structure an effective and results-oriented competition with states that have a vested interest in not dealing with climate change or dealing with it on their own terms, i.e. China or some of the Gulf states? So yes, how do we deal with the geopolitics of decarbonization? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Kira, you would like to answer?
Yeah, if I may make the start. I mean, first step would be to stop buying their oil. So I think, it's really easy to always blame the oil exporting countries while at the same time demanding cheap exports of oil into our countries. So I think the best pressure we can exert is through our own action. And I believe that even though there's no perfect commitment that has emerged from the COP, that we do have the power to really step up the ambition until the next COP and find other plurilateral fora to really push forward ambition on certain topics and make ourselves less dependent on fossil fuels. And this will decrease these states' revenue and will decrease their weight at the negotiations. And it will, in the end, render their economic model kind of unsuitable for the economy. So I think this is the best pressure point we have. Of course, there can be this shaming element, which has been done in the past. There can be other ways, but I think the most effective way is to really move forward ourselves with the renewable transition on many levels. I think this is the most effective way that we also have the most agency over. Another thing I wanted to point out before handing over is that Sophie von Löben is actually one of the lead authors of this report, And I just wanted to point this out on this comment that you made on collaboration, because the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research has driven forward this report, and the collaboration across different disciplines, but also across UN agencies, has brought together a very unique perspective. And I think this is what is needed to tackle these very complex crises and find some solutions. And the same for our collaboration for this event today. And together with SIPRI, Florian Krampe was driving this event, so it would come together from SIPRI, that although we did not collaborate on these specific products, we are trying to find ways to use our knowledge, our capacity to pool it, to bring a different set of people together. And I think this is how we can also find some new impulses to really strengthen the COP process in the end.
If we talked more to those communities which are on the front lines and who need to have answers for the challenges that they're being confronted with, then it's more likely we'd be able to work together towards a common approach. But what happens is we often go and sort of say, let's say it's UNHCR, we need to do a report on the Sahel, or PIC needs to do a report on the Sahel, or SIPRI needs to do it. Like everyone does not need to do a report on the Sahel. We just need to understand what are the issues in the Sahel and come up with who is interested in working towards trying to find that solution. So we've got to change the way. And I think donors have also got to have a big interest in this, because you often fund every agency that's out there to look at the Sahel. You don't need to do that. So when we're looking, one of the things which really frustrated me when I first looked at the Sahel was I said, okay, who's got the strategy on the Sahel? Like, I found 29. Everyone had a strategy for the Sahel. So no wonder it was like a complete basket case. Like everyone had their own approach. Even within UN agencies, you'd have one prioritization, one set of objectives at the field level, at the country level, at the regional level, and then at the headquarters level. But we've got to work the other way. Going back to the issue of the potential loss of the loss and damage fund. The framing or the proposal is supposed to come out in November. I think they've got to come up with some sort of recommendations. We would have lost the G77 by that stage. We need to be doing something far quicker than that. And I'm just sort of throwing this out there, but one of the issues which came to the fore when we're in COP was that when I was speaking to the Pakistanis, they were saying that the rating of Moody's had actually dropped, and so it was costing them more to recover because of the consequences of the flooding than it was before, because they were seen as a bad investment. So again, trying to change the way in which the international financial institutions are working and trying to reduce the level of debt rather than increase the level of debt, we have to focus on what is it that will support these countries doing the right thing. How can we get value to the environment, or value to education, or value to whatever? And one simple thing is to reduce the debt, have the debt for nature swap, or have the debt for, I don't want to say gender, but like what are the things that doesn't actually cost anything more, but is just a very clear demonstration that the international community who has the resources is actually doing the right thing. Because in the UN, if you never want to make a decision, you create a committee. Then you have a couple more reports, and based on those reports, you'll have another advisory committee. I don't want this to happen with this climate fund, because the issues are at stake. So rather than waiting for November, rather than waiting for these advisory committees, there are states out there who have got the potential to, I don't know, forgive debts, but to certainly not make it any worse for those countries. So this is where we've got to be pushing more. And the other issue is that why UNHCR is so engaged, and this is the vast majority, I don't say vast majority, but many of the states that are being impacted by climate change, including Pakistan, including Kenya, including Mozambique, have been some of the most generous countries hosting refugees for decades. So it's not just that we should be like providing charity. Like these countries have been doing hard yakka for a long, long time. And so it is just the moral thing to, it's not only the strategic thing, it's not only the ethical thing, it's just the right thing to be doing as well.
So we're just moving along the line. I'll address the military spending and the demilitarization question. And I think that, I mean, military spending went past $2 trillion for the first time in 2021. It's higher now than it has ever been. It was 1.5 trillion at the end of the Cold War, and it was down to just above $1 trillion at the beginning of this century. And now it's up to 2 trillion. And all the signs are that it will go further. So you're pointing at a real question, but of course, you know, the hard politics of this are that Russia has invaded Ukraine. There is a war going on, and it's extremely difficult at the moment to get a hearing in Western European countries, in the US, Canada, Japan, South Korea, for the idea that we should be reducing military spending. The common sense is to push ahead. So I think that we must maintain the wish, the desire, the aspiration for a less militarized world. But we also have to understand what the problems are, what this high military spending, if you look at it over time as a graph, it's like a temperature chart, right? It's like a temperature chart at the foot of the bed in the hospital. And you come along and you look at the patient, which in this case is the world, and you see that its fever has gone up. Military spending is a symptom of the problem. So we have to be addressing that problem as best we can. But in the meantime, is there any other place we can find these resources? Let's stop funding fossil fuels. The subsidies for fossil fuels, direct subsidies, are $500 billion a year. Let's stop doing that. Let's spend that $500 billion on something else. Once we've looked at that, let's look at the indirect subsidies via tax breaks for fossil fuels. The IMF reckons they are in the vicinity of $5 trillion a year. So I agree with you completely about the military spending issue and about the importance of demilitarization. But don't anybody try and come and tell me that because there is a war in Ukraine, we do not have the money available to invest in the shift to a green economy. We do. The other thing I just wanted to say quickly is that you raised the issue of the geopolitics of cooperation. And I think that, for example, as between Western countries and China, the EU and China, or the US and China, there's always going to be some elements of competition. There's always going to be degrees of cooperation. And there's always going to be degrees of confrontation. And the question is how you balance those. And I think that what is interesting is to see the way in which there is a reluctance at the moment in both the US and the USA and China, in the governments, to allow their disagreements over many issues to really get in the way of issues which they have common ground on, which includes climate change. That's different. That was different under the Trump administration for other reasons. But this US administration and China are capable of developing that cooperation despite those other areas of geopolitical tension. And that is, in some ways, that is what we're going to have to live with, understanding that the cooperation might be not as full as we want to see, but it can be there, it can happen, it can move ahead. What can't happen is for it to move ahead, I think. I mean, I throw this out, right? If you insist that every agreement for any step forward in handling climate change has got to be a global consensus, I think progress will be at the speed of a snail going backwards. Because at the same time, the problem is getting bigger. I was reading an article, I think, last night about somebody who said, the elephant in the room at COP is that there's never been a formal agreement, a binding agreement to reduce fossil fuels, never at any COP, right? And that is the elephant in the room. The problem is the elephant is getting bigger. So we've got two metaphors here. We've got an elephant who's growing too fast and a snail that's moving back very, very slowly. So let's try to get away from the idea it has to be global consensus. Let's try to move towards the idea that it's international cooperation of those who wish to cooperate. And let's work to make that a large enough percentage of the global economy that it really makes a difference.
Thank you very much. Regarding the time, we have one last question from the panel, from the online audience, towards Dr. Kira Vinke and Minister Wallström. So how can FFP be mainstreamed and explained to non-academic groups, both in German but also Western liberal society, to create more public pressure in understanding and awareness? And maybe, Kira, if I may add one other question and link that with that question. You have been attending the COP, and maybe you could also share with us, because I always admire your optimism, some optimistic thoughts after the last week in Egypt. Maybe if you would like to start briefly to answer this question, and then I give the final word to Kira.
Just to Dan first, isn't there a saying that when the elephants dance, the ants suffer? Yeah, or maybe the snails suffer.
Or when the elephants fight, the grass gets flattened.
All right. So, sorry, I think it is easy to explain the feminist foreign policy by saying that more women means more peace. The experience we have is that when women are at the negotiating table, when women sign peace agreements, we have more options on the table, and those peace agreements last longer. And I also think that you have to explain it in that it is practical, that it is not about identity, it is about the rights. If women and girls should enjoy the same legal and human rights as men and boys, that it is about representation, that women should be at the table where important decisions are being made. And that's also important from a democratic point of view, thinking that women make up half of the world's population. And thirdly, that resources should also be devoted to the needs of girls and women. And you have to start by making sure that you have good gender statistics and that you can actually measure also how resources are being spent in a budget, in a national budget, for example. So I think that those sort of 3 R's should continue to inform the way we work on the feminist foreign policy. It's about reforms and results as much, and it is as simple as making sure that it is done. This is done in a democratic, inclusive way, and that will also mean it's a smart policy to engage women to achieve peace, long-lasting peace.
I'm going to say something positive about the COP towards the end. I mean, if you think about it, it's an international gathering where government, civil society, industry come together largely to address and solve a global issue. And how unique is this? I think this in itself is such a big advancement of human global society, and that there have been breakthroughs. So I think this fund, no matter how flawed it may be, it's a huge breakthrough in terms of climate justice, and we should celebrate this breakthrough. And then I think we should not overload this process of the COP with more and more issues to be negotiated there, but rather focus on how to get around the table for mitigation. I think this is key. Overall, despite this breakthrough at the COP, we also have the very slow or stagnation on mitigation, and this should be emphasized, that this is not not sufficient. And I think the COP is a place to gather and to continue to get this global agreement implemented of the Paris Agreement. But it's not the only forum. And I think we need to carry this conversation, especially outside of these big international gatherings, to the subnational level, to more other fora. And overall, I want to say also, after you have shared the story of the woman without the legs and how she was suffering, is that we have no right to despair. I heard a lot of despair in the German media of how horrible everything is and how we have not, achieved what we should have achieved at the COP. But I think we don't have the right to despair, given the situation the privileged situation that we are in. And there are these glimmers of hope, and we have to work together along these glimmers of hope to get a better future for all. Thanks.
I just want to say, first of all, thanking DGAP for this cooperation for putting on the event, because we've been thanked a lot at SIPRI, but we're also very grateful to you. But I wanted to add, in a sense, a Swedish version to your thing of no right to despair. And it comes from Alva Myrdal, who was a woman, a diplomat and a political figure in Sweden, who was really the founding mother of SIPRI. She was the one who guided through the Royal Commission, which came up with the idea and which set SIPRI up. And there is a story about her, which of course is told in several different forms, which means nobody can quite remember it right. Maybe it didn't happen. Perhaps it's apocryphal, but it's such a brilliant short thing that a younger diplomat, a man, said to her, but surely this disarmament proposal is just, it has no hope. We should just stop it. And she looked at him and she said, young man, it would be undignified to give up. And I think that's the other side of that. It is actually quite serious to think that if you are surrendering and giving up, then you are in some way surrendering your dignity. Let's not do that.
Thank you very much. And I think with a lot of food for thought, but also maybe a little optimistic note, I would like to end this very interesting panel discussion. And first of all, I would like to thank our excellent speakers here for this very interesting discussion, but also for maybe giving us some hope, but also motivation to keep on our work and to try to raise up mitigation efforts, hopefully within the next year, and to keep the fight ongoing. We will have the opportunity to ask further questions in the other room where we have wine and the famous DGAP pretzels. And maybe you join me all in thanking our excellent panel here for our discussion. Thanks a lot.